Cha?
There you go.
Ah.
Ba-doom, boom. Isn't that great? There's your joke for the day. Don't say I didn't give you anything useful to take away on these conversations. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going well.
Things are going well. What's going on at Lone Peak Bible Church?
Well, we're getting to the end of the book of Ephesians. We've been studying that on Sunday mornings, and so that's exciting. And we have our men's and women's Bible studies that are going on right now, and we'll take a break in a little bit for the holidays, but those are exciting things right now.
Mm-hmm. And some people are like, ooh, so exciting
Yep.
to read the Bible.
It is.
Wow.
Uh,
But if you only knew, my friend, if you only knew.
yeah.
Well, I want to let you know there is something going on also in Provo, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this to you. Calvary City on a Hill is having a Thanksgiving. Let's see here. Let me just read it to you because I'm really bad at trying to figure this. It says, "Are you alone this Thanksgiving, unable to spend it with family? Nowhere to enjoy a bountiful meal, a family setting, a place you belong? Well, you are invited and welcome to join us on Thanksgiving Day. This is Calvary City on a Hill in Provo. For all those and more, fellowship, feasting, and the real reason for Thanksgiving. Come join us starting at 1 p.m. here at Calvary City on a Hill, Provo. And that, I can give you the address. It's just like right on 100 North there. So Thanksgiving Day, just go and eat. It sounds good. There's no strings attached, friend. There's no strings attached. So just go and have a good place to meet some really super, super sweet people. If you want more information about that, just let us know. Give us an email or whatever, and we'll get that out to you. So, yeah. Okay. So what else can we say? What else can I say? I want to say that we are going to talk about a huge, huge, uncomfortable topic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's uncomfortable. And that is just dealing with justice in regard to poverty. Now, we've begun talking about justice yesterday and what that is, but we don't really talk, when we think justice, many times, poverty is a part of it, but we're always going so crazy about social systems and what have you. And we are told as Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, to do justice. So that's a lot different than running around yelling and saying we want justice, but we are actually responsible to do justice. And that changes everything. That becomes like, instead of just this nice philosophical thing that we think about, it becomes, I guess this would be considered a command, a command by the Lord. And that makes us very uncomfortable in many respects because now it gets personal. And especially when it comes to things like poverty, because we look around and we see that there is some major issues. I mean, seriously, we have tent cities in Salt Lake City. You could look downtown Provo and you're seeing people who are just walking the streets with their shopping carts and whatever. You know what the situation is, but we choose to just kind of avert our eyes. Or you see the begging that is happening, and that's what it is, on the corners near great big shopping centers. And we can be very jaded about things because we also know human nature. And we also know that there are times when people actually choose to live poverty. That seems in poverty, meaning that they don't want a home. They just want to travel the country and whatever. And those are exceptions, right? There are other people who like to just say, you know what, I don't want to actually work. And they're going to deceive people and saying, I need money for this, this, and this. And one time I fell prey to that. There was a guy who said, I want to fill my gas tank. And then I'm off. And okay, so I was really generous because I thought, I get that. And then an hour later, I'm like, he's still there. And I know I gave him enough money for gas. So you feel a little cheated and jaded about it. Too bad. We're going to be uncomfortable today.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited, Chris, that you're here. You've studied this quite a bit.
Some.
Well, you've got a book that looks
out.
like it has been through the ringer dealing about this subject.
Someone gave it to me, so it was maybe a hint. I needed to. No, it was just a gift. I appreciated it.
Well, good. Well, good. And I just want to say, friend, if you feel uncomfortable about this, first off, this is not about shaming you. But if you have a question that you want to pose to Chris, or just say, you know what, here's something that I've been thinking about, or maybe you just have a comment or an observation, we really would love for you to be a part of this conversation. And you can do so a couple of different ways. We have a text line. That's 855-539-4583. 855-KEY-GLUE. We're also on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, and Facebook Live allows you to comment as we go. So you can go ahead and you can put your questions or what have you in the comment section there. Before we begin, I think I really like to talk about definitions, because sometimes we Americans, we don't really understand what poverty is. Like, even like this morning, Grant and I were kind of batting around ideas and talking points maybe. And one of the things I said was, we talked about monks, how they have a vow of poverty. But absolute poverty in many definitions is where you have the lack of housing and food and clothing, all the basic necessities, right? And I don't know of any monks who really didn't eat, it was their choice, but they had a place to stay. They had clothes on their back.
They forewent like personal property,
right?
But they still had the communal. This is what we have. This is our monastery, and so even and we talked about how that was a very intentional choice that they made of not pursuing earthly wealth and to instead focus on more spiritual things. And so that's a very intentional lifestyle choice, and not like a state of poverty, but more of a self-imposed poverty.
Right. So do you have a working definition of poverty, perhaps, Chris?
I don't have a working definition. I think that so there are people that are in different stages or different places when it comes to poverty.
Okay.
And so there may be people who are dealing this lack of relationship, and I would say that they are in some form of poverty. There may be those who are dealing with mental handicaps, and they're in some form of poverty. And there may be those who are, and ultimately, right, we're because of the sinfulness of man, we're all ultimately poor, right? And so what we have to offer is empty.
Okay, I want to press
Jesus.
into that, because you just said something like, what? Wait a minute. Okay, we're all ultimately poor, and the neighbor across the street just bought a brand new Lamborghini or whatever the thing is. So explain yourself a little bit more.
Well, I'm saying that in and of ourselves, we have nothing that can that we can bring to the table that gives us what we desperately need, which is a relationship with God. We have been created for relationship. We've been created for worship, and that is to be directed towards God. And so as broken people, we suffer the consequences of our sin and separation from God. And so that's, in a sense, a poorness that we have, right? We can't purchase this thing. And so in God's grace, He's made a way for us to be able to no longer be poor, but to be given this opportunity to have a relationship through faith in Jesus.
No, that's stunning, actually, and it should jar all of us, right? There's nothing good in any of us. So that, I think, is the reason why, too. You might have people who we would consider poor, right, who are barely scraping along, and yet they're some of the most content people on the planet. And the reason is because they have a peace that maybe we don't have. And that peace, a lot of times, it's the Lord Jesus, right? Like, I know the Lord will never leave me or forsake me. And so even in this situation, I know that my God will provide for all my needs, and He will give me rest for my soul. There's a lot of that you see that we don't really talk about much.
Yeah. So maybe the question that could be posed is, what is the need, right? And so everybody has a need, and so we might say, well, the poor person needs whatever, but for the guy who just has massive house, lots of money, all that kind of stuff, there's still a need there. And so I would say that their poorness gets connected to that need. Right. We tend to think of things monetarily and in terms of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm glad you said relationship too, because I think many times we could see somebody who's not, like, financially they're fine, right? They're paying their bills and whatever, but we'll call them needy, right? Like, man, those people are so needy. And again, it's a poverty of, let's say, relationship. So I'm just really glad you're expanding that concept to us as well.
Well, we have to be reminded, excuse me, we have to be reminded that everybody needs the gospel.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about poverty, we don't want to get too far into how do we meet their food need, their housing need, etc., because they need Jesus. And that's my main thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, too, what we're kind of going back to, I don't think we meant to do this, but this whole thing of being impartial, not to show partiality to other people. I think this is part of the heart condition that all of us face. Is you look at somebody, maybe they're like a celebrity of sorts, and you're like, oh, like, and then you treat them very different than somebody else who might kind of depend on you or what have you, or at least won't be able to provide you, I don't know, the cool factor. Like there's people around and I'm like, man, you're so cool. If I touch you, will I be cool too? Right? But the idea is that we're not supposed to show partiality. And again, going back and reminding of James 2, my brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, oh, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, oh, you stand over there, or sit down at my feet, just, go over there, then have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? And then he says, listen, my beloved brothers. And again, this is James talking to believers. And when you say beloved brothers, we're not talking about just mankind. We're talking about people who have been redeemed by Jesus. He says, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. And he goes on to talk about that. So this it's a sin to show partiality. Now, I'm really appreciating this too, because now in talking about poverty, human beings have a tendency to foist their own presuppositions on the why the person is in this situation. Like maybe they're lazy, or maybe maybe they just they squandered all their wealth and they're fools, right? So we sometimes we'll look at somebody and we've already judged them in our hearts. What would you say to that individual? Which I'm pretty sure I could just raise my hand embarrassingly and say, I've done this a million times.
We've all been there, right?
Oh, it's embarrassing.
Yeah. So it's important to try not to do that, but it's hard not to do that, right? If evidence is there, if you see things, then you make the best decision based off the information that you have, and you try not to jump to conclusions, right? That's just, it's hard.
Okay.
I'm just echoing. I agree, right?
Thank you for being so gracious for me.
I mean, it is a very popular philosophy that, especially amongst Christians, is that it is that God blesses good people and he curses bad people. And that's not really. And then we look at things like how well we are doing financially as that's a blessing from God. I get that because I'm a good person. And if we don't have that, or if we look at someone else who doesn't have the same level of financial blessing, we say, oh, it's because you've got some sin in your life. You're not quite as the same righteous dude that I am. And so we kind of pass judgment and look down on people who might not be doing as well, or whose lives are falling apart, whose relationships are crumbling. And we say, at least I'm not them. I'm not as bad as them. I must be doing better than them. They must be doing something wrong because things are falling apart for them. So God is blessing me and not them.
Yeah, there's some blessing that comes with biblical principles.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you that equals righteousness, right? If that were the case, everybody hanging out with Job would have been like, oh, that guy. He's so unrighteous.
Right.
And that was the opposite, right? And so it's, we only get to see from our perspective, but God sees everything. And so he may bring these struggles into people's lives. It's important to know that following Jesus doesn't always equal wealth or riches or an easy life, right? And so sometimes there's some difficulty that comes with that. James also addresses that, just in same book. And so we have to be careful with how we view those things.
Pastor Rudy Rodriguez is commenting here, and he says, "Blessed are the poor or impoverished in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," quoting Matthew 5:3. So thank you very much for that as well, and good morning. I think it's important that we do discuss a little bit about the causes before we go into our responsibilities. And there are a number of causes of poverty, and one of a couple of those we've mentioned, such as sometimes mentally we are impoverished, right? Like maybe there's mental illness issues where a person is just not functional as far as being able to work and to get some money, right? And so those are, and we see that a lot, I think, in homeless communities where we see people are just, they're really, really struggling, and their perception of reality is just skewed, and it's hard to have a conversation with them. I myself have encountered or tried to interact with an individual who is clearly suffering from some mental illnesses. And so for that, we need to be very charitable in spirit and making sure that we're not, again, foisting our own presuppositions on these people without knowing their total. But that's one that could be one cause. And are we feeling uncomfortable? I just want to say, I'm going to say things that we're going to feel uncomfortable. If you're angry about maybe something I said, that's good. Maybe say something and comment about it so that we make sure that we're all on the same page here. Unjust social systems, right? And we could say that would mean something like, let's say you're working really, really hard at a job and they're just not paying you. Now, that doesn't mean like you're going to make $1 million a year working at a fast food restaurant, but the wages need to be fair, right? We'll just say fair wages. Otherwise, especially like, or if a employer says, listen, I'm going to pay you this much, and then they go back on their word, that would be considered unjust, and that could cause some poverty. Disaster. All of a sudden, you're doing life great, and all of a sudden, let's say you get into a car accident and you lose the use of your arms or something, and that was really critical in your job. That could be, or maybe your tornado came or whatever. Disaster does happen, where that would cause people to fall into a poverty situation where they would need help. Other things like foolishness, let's just say for what it is, right? Where you're like, you know what, I've got all of this money and I'm going to invest it in Cheeto. Like what was the VeggieTales, the cheese curls, the VeggieTales thing. You know, I was thinking a little stocks, a little bonds, but no, you had to invest it in all these cheese curls, right? That kind of thing. But foolishness, not asking people for help in a certain situation. It was a weakness in yours, and you went ahead and did it anyway. And you know what? To be quite frank, we're all foolish in some area in our lives, but that could have some consequences as well. So those are just some areas that I just kind of was thinking about, which could cause poverty. Yeah. And there's more. But let's just face that that's the situation. So having said that, too, I think we also have to understand the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. And absolute poverty could be like, you just don't have the basic needs, right? You don't have a house or at least a place to stay. Your clothing, food, that sort of thing. All of those necessities in life, you don't have. That's absolute poverty. We see that a lot. We see that on TV. But normally, normally the commercials are showing us like little children in deep poverty across the ocean, right? But we need to also recognize that could be in our backyard as well. Relative poverty, though, would be like, okay, I'm really struggling here. I do have my basic needs met, maybe not ideally, but compared to the rest of my I would say community. Let's say community. Those people are doing much better than me. I'm struggling here. That could be a relative poverty. Not to say that diminishes your situation, but we just need to understand that there is severe poverty, which would be absolute, and then there's relative poverty. Not to say, though, that in relative poverty, there aren't some major needs that need to be taken. So, but I think it's good to have these definitions and to keep in mind, just now, as a Christian, how are we dealing with the people who are in need? And basically, that's the real issue, right?
Right. That kind of dictates our response, right? Where people are at. And you kind of have to figure out where they're at a little bit. I mean, I think of the story of the Good Samaritan, right? That person was robbed, it was wounded, etc., and didn't, needed help right then, right there. There was nobody else, it was the kind of thing where you step in and you help that person. And then there's other people that may have their basic needs met, and they need somebody that can spend a little more time walking with them, helping them make good decisions, and making sure that they're cared for. Right? These types of things. If I could push like a direction, I would say when we're helping people, we want to be careful not to do it apart from the church. We want to give people a place where they can find community, where they can find a resource and a support group, right?
I stop there because some of us have been
Yep.
abused by that, or at least deceived by it.
Okay.
Where there might be a church that says, okay, yeah, come in and we're going to help you.
Yeah.
And then if you don't actually be a part of this or you don't follow then we're going to leave you like a hot potato.
Yeah,
I mean, and there's
the
a
bait
lot
and
of...
switch, yeah.
Exactly. So when you say that, can you explain that a little further?
Yeah. So it probably begins on an individual level, right? There's a connection that's made between you and somebody in the community, however that connection is made. And then I think that relationship should be developed, grown. Remember, like what we're trying to do is get them to the point of understanding they need Jesus, right? Assuming that they don't need that they don't have a relationship with him already. So the number one need is that they need to know Jesus. The secondary need is that they need these other things. Now, sometimes you have to get to these other things in order to be able to communicate that they need Jesus. And so you kind of balance those two things out. But I think that the church, it shouldn't be a place of manipulation. And at the same time, most of the people that are in the situation of having these needs, they need a community around them. One person is usually not enough to manage the burden of helping someone out. And so if you can bring them into a community, I think that's helpful.
And I love what you just said about bringing someone into a community because definitions are so important, right? A lot of times when we talk about church, we're talking about an organization or a building or some sort of, I don't know, system in and of itself. It doesn't, the words that you're using right now, Chris, that doesn't sound like what that understanding is. So what is a church?
It's the people, everybody needs people around them. And so God has given everybody these gifts, talents, and abilities. And so within community, these people that are in situations where they're struggling, they're given the opportunity to not only get to the point where they can find help, but they can be a contributor to that community. And I think a lot of times in being a contributor to the community, they find a renewed sense of purpose. When we're able to communicate, hey, they're made in the image of God.
Yeah.
This is a big thing, right? It gives them a purpose. It gives them a reason for being, and then it gives them just this motivation to be able to keep going.
Yeah, when it comes to us as Americans, we're very organized. We're very organization heavy, where it's like, leadership is in charge of this, and we have a program that they've put in place, and this will take care of this. This program will address this need. This is our children's program. This is our program for little ladies. This is our program for this or that. This is our program that addresses the financial needs. And so it's like, someone has a financial need. It's like, oh, I can help by pointing you to the correct program. This is your need. Here is your program. See you. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
And that's not really...
It makes my conscience feel okay. Like
I
did what I was
I
supposed
feel
to.
better, but
Yeah.
that's not what the Bible is talking about here. It's not talking about an organization or a program, but instead it's a call to us as individuals and as a community of how are we going to treat those around us who have a need, whatever the need may be, whether it's financial, spiritual, emotional, what have you.
That just reminds me of the Charles Dickens, the Scrooge. It's not Scrooge. What is it called?
Is
A
it
Christmas
not?
Carol.
Yeah,
Yeah, where he was just talking about that. They're the people with the.
Are there no workhouses?
That's right. Exactly.
Are there no places they can go? Yeah, and it is a very like a socialist kind of mentality of like we have government, we have charities. I don't need to do anything. We already have these programs put in place.
Yeah. So fascinating. So to reflect on that, you can look at other people who have that attitude and go, "Oh, they're so cold," but yet then when it's posed to us, we're like, "Wait, am I doing the same thing?" So that's really important that we understand that many times there could be a financial need, but that relationship part of it is so very critical because if you could just be thrown money at you and then everything
Right.
is fine, well, okay, but we are not that kind of, like you said, we're made in the image of God. We are made for relationship and belonging. And if people are just giving you stuff with impersonal help, I mean, that's no help at all. We need something more, and we need to be a contributing member of a family, right? That's how we're just designed.
Right. Now,
Yes.
that we can understand that, but the person in that situation of need, they may not see that, right? And so this may be a process, something that takes time, and we like to throw money at things, not time, right? As Americans, that's how we solve things. We throw money at it. And so this, to be helpful, sometimes it takes a lot more time. And so there's some commitment that's involved, some sacrifice that's involved. And that's why I say that it takes a community a lot of times to be able to, have this impact. And there's some statistic, I think, to develop trust with someone that's in the homeless situation, I think you have to have 70 points of contact with them before they come to that point of trusting you. And so I don't expect you today to go out and invite someone to your church and have them show up this Sunday. That's probably not going to happen. If it does, great, but it's probably not. And so there's this process of developing this relationship, and there's things that are communicated, right? Sometimes, you're trying to judge the situation and figure out what's best in that situation. But and I was talking with my wife about this last night. She reminded me that sometimes when you give something to someone, it may not meet their primary need, or it may not be the biggest thing that you're not solving the biggest issue. But what you could be doing is that you're communicating, number one, that you care about that other person, that you saw that other person, and you're speaking something to what kind of character you possess. And so that can communicate something as you make that gift. Number two, sometimes those gifts, if you're giving something away, it might just be like a placeholder. Like you're just buying time. And so you're establishing the relationship and buying time. And I would say that you're doing this carefully, right? Because you don't want to contribute to the problem, right? If the problem is some kind of abuse of alcohol or drugs or something like that, right? You don't want to contribute to that problem. But if you see a legitimate need, you go and buy some groceries and give them to someone. There's a way you can help and establish that connection of relationship.
Yeah. We got a text from our friend Kay, and she said that her and her husband Greg, they purchase gift cards for fast food restaurants, and they hand those out. So they come prepared. They have the gift cards, and they know that this is food money, and it's already been designated to that as a gift card. So yeah, I think that's a good way of doing that.
That's so intentional, and not just intentional, but it is having foresight to be prepared when God brings a need to you. That's something that we don't always talk about, right? Is that we're stewarding what God has given us, right? And that means that what we have, if we're truly, truly understanding the love of God and our place and God's grace toward us, then we understand that everything that we currently possess is really not our possession, but it's God's gifts to us that we are then to steward. Right. And so that means, like, if God is truly concerned about the poor, and He is, throughout Scripture, it says, to be kind to the poor, to the orphan, and to the widow, right? I mean, we're supposed to be caring for one another. Well, then we need to be prepared for those times when God gives us opportunities to be generous with his. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, good. All right. What I wanted to say too was this, and this is just something that just really struck me between the eyes. And I'm confessing my sins. Thank you for just loving me and giving me grace. But Timothy Keller says this. He's quoting Proverbs 3:27. And he says, "Do not." In Proverbs 3:27, it says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act." And then he just says, "If you have more worldly goods, it is your responsibility to share." Why? And then he says, "The phrase 'to whom it is due' translates to a single Hebrew word that means simply the owners." And then he says this: "The needy then have some claim on your assets." And I'm like, as an American who's quite the hoarder, I was kind of, okay, I need to confess something. There must be. So what it would be, what's your response to that striking statement?
Yeah. I think it goes back to recognizing where it all comes from, right? The things that I have, they're they're not mine. They belong to God. And so God has given these things to us as tools to use for his glory. And so we use that in a number of different ways, but one of the ways we use them is to help others. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So help us here. I mean, we're talking about poverty. Here's the thing, and I think you've kind of already alluded to it, but I just want to say it outright here. There is a huge problem. There's always going to be people in need. There is always and we don't have to even use the word poverty. There's just always going to be some people in need. And probably in our lifetimes, we too will be finding ourselves in need, okay? So what do? We, as individuals, we cannot just simply, unless we just have, well, even the buco bucks, let's say we had buco bucks, that's not going to help the problem. So what do we do as Christians? How do we meet needs? What are we supposed to do in order to do justice in this particular area?
I think it starts with one, right?
Right.
And so you don't have to go into this thinking, I got to change the world. Now, some people can go into it that way, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But if that's overwhelming to you, think, okay, just one. Who can I help today, right? And it may be that you go find your bus stop and you wait for someone to come along and you try and start the conversation. And again, I tell you, it takes time. And so it might not be going to a homeless camp and having handing out sandwiches. It might not look like that. It might look like you got a family member that's finding themselves in a difficult situation, and God has put you in that position to be a resource and a help to them. Or maybe it's just someone that's in your community that you know of living down the street. They're having a hard time, and you know about this hard time, and so you're able to step in and be an encouragement to them.
So let's talk about it in the context of church too. I really just love this. Start with the one. But I think too, sometimes we like to, again, Americans, we love to throw like money at a situation thinking that's going to fix everything. And sometimes that's just not the wise thing to do. Now, nobody likes to hear that because we think that money solves all of our problems. But you only have to look at the curse of the lottery when people win $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever. And then the very next year, they are impoverished because it's just overwhelming to them. Sometimes that kind of addressing a situation does more harm than good. That's, I think, why we need to have wisdom and we need to ask. That's why I think we need community when we are dealing with maybe one issue, maybe two issues, right? And again, that's where that local church really does help us, right? So, okay, what else do you have for us here, Chris? Let's go Bible here. Do you have anything from God's Word that would really guide us? Because we really do need discernment.
So just to clarify, there's a biblical principle here. And so I have a few verses that I jotted down just to remind us that this is something that God wants us to engage in. Proverbs 19:17 says, "One who is gracious to a poor man lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed." The Lord notices when you do these things, right? And the reason for our giving, our helping, is not so that we can say, hey, look at me, pat me on the back, it's so great. Hey, let me go talk to my neighbor about what I did today and make myself sound so good. We have to have this heavenly focus of what, this all belongs to God. And now I'm able to do this as for him, right? 1 John 3:17-18 says, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? So it calls into question how much you love God whenever you're willing to hold on to those things and you see somebody else in a need.
So this is a spiritual act of service.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Very much so.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think giving in general is is something that is a spiritual act of service. And so we tend to think of it in money, but you give time, you give whatever it is, a conversation, those things it's spiritual in nature. It should be done for God. Proverbs 14 verse 31 says, he who opposes the poor taunts his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. So if you want to honor God, be gracious to the needy, right? Luke 3:11. This is one of my favorite passages. This is where some men come to John the Baptist, and they're like, all right, we believe in Jesus. Now, what do we do? And he says, he answers, whoever has 2 tunics is to share with he who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise. It's like, hey, if you got 2 sandwiches, give one to your buddy, share. Be willing to share these things. And like his response is like, all right, after you come to faith, after you know who Jesus is, this is what you do. And John just states it so like, boom, there it is. Just go and share with somebody.
That's so awesome.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to share. Oh, what else do you have?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we just have a comment here from the Mitchells here, and it's of course I love it when people just give us Bible verses. It's just thanks for doing that. But here is Acts 3:6-8. And he fixed his attention on them. Well, in fact, we should just get it, but it's a beggar, right? Expecting to receive something from Peter. But Peter said, I have no silver and gold, but what I do have, I give to you. In the name of Jesus of Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and his ankles were made strong. And leaping up, he stood and began to walk and entered the temple with them, walking and leaping and praising God. And isn't that really our motivation in all of this? Like you just said, this is our spiritual act of service and worship. We're not doing this ultimately for the individual, but we're doing this to the glory of God. That our vision is always heavenly focused. And if this person who's in need is a concern of the Lord's, then we need to be concerned for them as well. So that's exactly what you've been saying. Yeah, exactly. But I love how this is like, this guy is begging and Peter's like, I have something so much better for you. But he didn't just say, here's the gospel and walk on his way. The man stood up and walked. The need was still met. But those weren't divorced. The need, the spiritual need and the physical need were both met.
Yeah. So this is a good passage to look at, because when we think of giving, right, we think of money. And it might be that you're in a situation where, well, I don't have money, but I might have time, or I might have some other resource that is needed. I might have an extra loaf of bread or eggs or whatever it is, right? And so you use what you have. And here, there's the definite goal of communicating the gospel. Yeah.
Right. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. Okay, what else you got? This is...
Ephesians 4 reminds us that we're to let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. So even the thief is encouraged to no longer take things, but to be one who contributes. And that's kind of the goal, right? If the goal is to just give, then we kind of create this cycle, right? Of, well, this person, they're just going to keep asking because you keep giving, and you have to get to the point, and the only way to get to that point is through the relationship, I think, of allowing them to come along and be a part of contributing, and you kind of work with people to that point.
Friend, you are listening to Key Radio. Mike and Heather in the morning. And in the studio, we have Grant Burkhalter at the controls, making sure that you can hear us loud and clear. And our very good friend, Pastor Chris Dotson of Lone Peak Bible Church in Highland, Utah. We're talking about doing justice, and particularly when dealing with poverty and need. And I think, Chris, you just raised something that's been on the hearts and minds of so many people, though, and that is where people feel like they're being used up, right? Like there's an individual who has a need, and then the next day they have the same need. And so you try to help them out with that. And then the next week they come back with the same need. And so you come and you're like, okay, something isn't right, and you feel like you're being manipulated. You feel like maybe you're being taken advantage of. Or what do you do in a situation like that? And I know the magic word you just said was relationship. Help us out. How do we navigate that? Because we want to love the Lord. We want to honor the Lord. But this individual, it just feels, is just taking advantage of us in ways that just feel so unjust, right?
All right. Well, let me just mention a book. I'm getting some of these principles from a book that's titled When Helping Hurts. And so if you haven't read it, I encourage you to, if it's something you want to know more about, that's a good book for this topic. In the book, they lay out these different types of principles that you use when helping people. And so I would say that there's definite goals that are set. They have to be you have to be able to see progress. You have to be able to see that there's some people that aren't willing to change.
Right.
And when they're unwilling to change, you are, in some sense, you're just spinning your tires. You're putting energy and effort into something that's not going anywhere. And so there's a balance of this give and take. And so and it may be the thing that you're giving is not what they need. It may be that what they need is to suffer some of the consequences of a bad decision.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think at the core of this, there's this question of, am I treating the symptoms or am I treating the disease? Or am I easing the symptoms? And so sometimes we need that easing of the symptoms. We need, the bowl of chicken soup is not going to cure the cold, but it will help. And so it's like, am I offering that bowl of chicken soup knowing this isn't going to cure the cold, it's going to ease the pain. But when it's like, all I'm doing is making chicken soup, it's like, then you need to ask, what is this actually helpful? Or do I need to help them get, the cold is a bad example because there's no cure for the common cold. But, it's just like, am I providing that health care that will treat the disease, or is this just a drug to treat the symptoms? Or am I recognizing I am just helping to ease the pain of the symptoms? So I don't know if that's helpful, if that addresses anything,
Right.
or if that contributes or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. If someone has a headache and you give them a Tylenol, but they have a brain tumor, then
That's not helpful.
right.
No.
But I
And
mean, it's a little.
So
little
the thing,
helpful.
and the thing is, so people need the gospel, right? That's the ultimate need, is that they need to know who Jesus is. And so you're left in the situation of trying to exercise discernment and wisdom and it may be that at that point in time, you give them a Tylenol in order to, buy them,
Buy them time.
buy them time. Yep. You're just giving yourself another opportunity later. And so you kind of have to weigh out those pros and cons whenever it comes to developing that relationship. And the more you develop the relationship, the more you can see through the facade or the way they might be manipulating, et cetera.
I want to lean in a little bit on what you said about sometimes they need to suffer the consequences. I mean, that just sounds so harsh.
Yeah.
And almost like Christians could get very criticized for saying, you know what, you're going to have to, seriously, right? Because as a Christian, aren't you supposed to fix everything, right?
yeah, we can't fix everything, right? Only Jesus fixes everything. And if they're unwilling to, if there are people that are unwilling to change, or they're unwilling to take steps towards change, towards Jesus, towards the relationship, etc., there's always more hurting people,
Right.
right? And so I'm not saying that you give up on helping people. I'm just saying you put your energy and effort into where it's most valuable or useful.
Does that mean, though, that you just leave them high and dry and say, you're dead to me?
No, not necessarily. No.
Okay. So, I mean, in a situation where they're just clearly not helping themselves, like, I mean, you don't want, because it's not even biblical, God helps those who help themselves. That's
Right.
not even anywhere in the Bible. So we don't ever want to fall into that trap. But on the same, like, okay, I'm just going to, here's the deal. You're going to have to take some steps. You're not taking some steps, you're going to have to suffer some consequences. I mean, is that what you say to a person, or depending on the situation?
Yeah, it depends.
But you can't leave them high and dry. I mean, there's still things that we can do. Number one,
Right.
check in on them.
Sure.
Well, actually, not number one. That'd be number two. Number one is pray for them, right? Because it's a heart issue at that point, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
And always reminding them about the grace and love of Jesus.
Right. So, yeah, they need to suffering those consequences. So what we're trying to do is break a cycle, right? And the cycle is you give them something, they don't feel the pain of their bad decision, they keep making bad decisions. And so that's the goal is to break that cycle so that they can come out of that cycle into something different. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's good. But you can't be their savior. And that's
Right.
the other thing, because there's many of
No.
us who just want to fix everything. We're fixers. That's what we do.
Right.
We can't change the heart. That's God's business. But we're not left without we're not left without anything. Like, we could pray and talk to the Lord. And if you truly believe that the Lord hears the prayers of the righteous, which you are made righteous in Jesus Christ, then you have that relationship, that communication with the Lord, and you could pray for your friend. And that's the other part is you want to be their friend, right? It's not a manipulative thing.
Yeah.
You really do want to be their friend. You care about that individual. And let's say they hurt you, because hurting people hurt people, right?
Yep.
You're going to have to ask the Lord for thick skin on that as well, right?
Yeah. And when you're dealing with people in need, there's usually some hurt that's involved at some point. Yeah.
That doesn't
Yeah.
sound like any fun, Chris.
Well, it's a lot of fun if you're doing it for Jesus.
Right.
You got to keep your perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Friend, if you were wondering about that book, When Helping Hurts, I put a link on our Facebook page there for you, and you can just link it and check it out for yourself. It sounds like it's a really good resource for you. One of the other things, though, you have to watch for is, having first off I would say the spiritual health yourself, to know that we are to be generous, that we know that people need Jesus. And the reason, many of the times why we're hurting is because we are not living for Jesus. But in the case where it's not of anybody's own fault, right? We also have to be very, very generous with our mercy and our love toward them as well, and with our prayers. So those are some things that we need to understand, and also understanding that in a case where a person is hurting deeply, they're going to lash out, because that's what human beings do. And we have to be, I don't want to say we will have to be okay with that, but we also have to have that mercy to say, you know what? I know that you have a deep hurt right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to abandon you if you hurt me. And that's a hard place to be for some of us,
Yeah.
right? Because in that situation, we're dealing with a generosity of love. And love is not easy. It's not a good squishy feeling. Like when you help somebody and you walk away and you feel like awful, but you choose to be there, that's love. If you're getting I did a great job today being with that person, probably not so much, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a tendency too, though, that you in your spiritual act of service and love, we can tend to sin as well, like maybe gossip. When is it appropriate to talk to somebody about the situation you're helping with,
Mm-hmm.
and when is it gossip?
Yeah. I think that number one, if the person you're talking to is not a part of a solution, then, I don't think they have a need to know, right? But there may be times when you need advice or counsel or encouragement when you're dealing with people that have these needs. And so it kind of depends on the situation a little bit as to how big the need is. If you're bringing someone into this community, then at some point we want to bear one another's burdens, and part of that is one person can't do it all, and so you bring other people into the conversation. You don't want to embarrass people or put them in the situation where you don't want to talk about people in terms of them being a project, right?
Right.
Because they are people. They are made in the image of God. God has given them value, and so we can have this holier than thou attitude whenever we come into the scenario because we have something that they need or that they don't have, and we want to be careful with that kind of mentality. And that kind of mentality can feed into let me talk to my buddy about this. I want them to know how good I am, and that kind of thing. And just keep those things to yourself. Yeah.
So some principles that we can, wow, our time just flew. Some principles that we come away with. And number one is we need to have a spirit of generosity. Number one, because people matter to God. They are made in his image. And therefore, when they are struggling, he cares for them.
Yeah.
So we need to have a heart. And if we don't have a heart for those people who are struggling, the first thing we do as believers in Jesus Christ is we just confess that, right? This is not a guilt trip. This is how do we walk and talk more like Jesus every day? So you go before him and you say, Lord, you're going to have to give me a heart because I am really hard-hearted about these issues. And ask him to break your heart for what breaks his. I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
I think also, too, if there's an immediate need, understanding that really that immediate need is spiritual. These people need Jesus. You need Jesus. We all are impoverished spiritually. So that don't ever do something not disconnected with the gospel.
Right.
But don't fail to meet a need.
Yep.
It's not an either or situation.
Yeah. Yep.
Another one would be expect to be hurt. It's okay. This is to do justice and to love people in general is a sacrificial act.
Yeah.
And sometimes it hurts, and it's okay. Another thing that I learned would be prepared. Be ready to be generous. Like, don't just and then be surprised when a need, there's need everywhere. Be ready to meet a need. Doesn't necessarily have to be financial. You could just pray for somebody. You can spend some time. You can, all of that. What other takeaway, Chris, should we have that you really want us to mull over in these last few days?
Every situation is different.
Okay.
And so just try and understand the situation the best that you can. Every person, they're all gonna. The need is there, but they might have similar needs, but they might have a different reason as to how they got to that point. And so understand their background, where they came from, the best you can. Yep. And if you feel overwhelmed, like it's too much, like get help. Right? There's resources. Find ways to help them out with, even if you can't.
Which is, again, the reason why it's just the local church is such a beautiful gift that God has given us.
Yeah.
Because we don't do this alone. And if somebody really needs help, we can call on each other to help each other out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Don't ever feel like the whole world is on your shoulders. And if you don't know how to express generosity and justice in all of these areas, just start with the one.
Yeah.
I love it. Start with the one.
Yeah.
And friend, if you are in the Highland area and you need a community, you're like, hey, I just want to worship God with a community, perhaps Lone
Sundays
Peak.
at 10:30. You can find us online at lonepeak.church or on Facebook.
Wonderful. Chris, thank you. This was so good. I have so many other questions, maybe another day.
Yeah, it's great.
And
Thank
dear
you.
friend, practice generosity.